All right, we're recording now. Welcome to 2024 Tournament Eligibility Affidavit Book Training and Expectations. I do expect this training to take about 2 hours, hopefully not more. We will take a break at 11 o'clock. If I don't take a break at 11 o'clock, somebody please let me know it's 11 o'clock and we'll take a break. And so we're going to jump right into it. This is being recorded. As I said, it will be out on our YouTube channel, which let me just break out of the PowerPoint for a second. I think I've got it up here. It's on our YouTube channel, or will be on our YouTube channel. Right now, the only thing out there are the playing rules training we had back in April. And anyone will be able to go back out there and review this. I also will take any questions you have about affidavit book as you are preparing. And I will very much welcome your questions, because it's much better to ask questions and get things straight and get things correct than when I am doing the verification to have to go back to you and have you correct things. So, but that's all right too. It's never a black mark on you if I do have to correct something, but we do need to get these right. So that's the YouTube channel. All right. So what is a Little League International Tournament affidavit? Well, the affidavit itself is one document. It's an affidavit is a written statement of which the signer or affidavit, whatever that word is, verifies that the document is true. And that's what you as presidents and player agents and managers are doing when you sign this affidavit. So the Little League Tournament affidavit is a document that is used to identify the players, coaches, managers on a team. And it is important to recognize that this is a legal document, and it basically allows Little League to take action against a team or a league if they're not in compliance, so that you don't go back and take them to court over things, because what you're saying is true on here. It needs to be the truth. And so that's why it is a legal document. All right, what is an affidavit book or binder? The affidavit book contains the affidavit, but it also contains all the necessary documentation to support that the affidavit, what's on it, is true. And that is used to certify each player's eligibility for participation in the international tournament. Once this book is approved by the district administrator, me, the affidavit book is the responsibility of the team's manager and must be at the game site for all of the team's tournament games at each level of play. Now, what we typically do, for those of you that don't know, once the tournament starts, well, actually, once I get the affidavit books and once I have them approved, I will keep them so that they will always be at the tournament site, and we don't have to worry about the managers forgetting them. I do the same thing at state tournaments. I do the same thing at my regional. I know a lot of other state tournament directors do the same thing. But if the manager has to have it and they don't confiscate it and just keep it for the whole tournament, then they must know that it has to be at the game site for each one of their games. So what are the consequences for not properly preparing an affidavit book? Players who cannot be certified will not be allowed to participate in the Little League tournament. If a minimum of 12 players are not certified, a whole team cannot be certified and won't be allowed to participate without a waiver. And of course, there are waivers for leagues that just can't get 12 players. The maximum is 14 for all divisions except for senior league, which it is 16 for those. We like to see full rosters. If you have less than 12, Little League doesn't like that, and teams often will try and gain a competitive advantage by having less than 12. So they want to have 12 not just on the affidavit, but at the game. And they would prefer to have full rosters of 14 and 16. We have a very significant responsibility to both Little League and our families to get this right. All right, when should leagues begin preparing their affidavit books? The affidavit book contains documents that by rule should be obtained from a player's guardians during registration in order for the player to be eligible to play in your league. If they don't live inside your boundary or don't attend school inside your boundary, then you should have gotten a waiver for them already. And we have until June 1st to get those waivers. So if you know of a kid that is going to play on one of your all-star teams that isn't in your boundary, you need to be getting to work on those waivers right away. We'll talk about waivers a little bit later. All right, completing the eligibility affidavit. To create an eligibility affidavit, it's done on the data center. And to create one, you have to have already enrolled in the tournament for the specific division that you are going to be creating that affidavit for. Here we see an example from Newcastle's data center showing that they are enrolled, and they would be able to click on that Manage Affidavits to start making an affidavit. Now this year I'm going to try something a little bit different. There is a video that Little League just released earlier this month that shows how you go onto the data center and put together the actual affidavit. And we're going to try and watch this video. And then afterwards, we're going to discuss what should be entered in each one of the fields, because they don't really go into that very much, and also pitfalls to avoid. So I'm going to pull this up, and hopefully we're going to be able to watch it. All right, here we go.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this affidavit tutorial. My name is Nick Caringi. I'm the Senior Director of Operations and Education for Little League Baseball and Softball here in Williamsport. With me today is Steve White. Steve is from our IT team, and Steve will help walk us through the affidavit. Steve, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Nick?
I'm doing well. It's been a few years since we've done this, so you and I thought that we would update it, and thankfully we're not showing our video because you'd see all the gray hair that I have since the last time we've done it. So Steve, I'm going to kick it over to you and walk us through the Mifflinburg Area Little League affidavit.
All right, thank you. So yeah, this is the data center, as I'm sure you've all seen before. In this instance, this league has already enrolled in tournament, as you can see here on their tournament status. It's marked enrolled. And so once you're enrolled in tournament, you'll have a link to manage affidavits, assuming that you have the permission to manage affidavits. This is by default given to league presidents and league player agents, but it can be assigned to other officers as needed. So you can click here on manage affidavits, or you can scroll down on the left and manage tournament affidavits from the league resources list as well. So we'll click here to manage affidavits. Before your league before you've created an affidavit, you won't see a list here. And so you'll need to start a new tournament affidavit by clicking the button. At that point, you'll need to select the tournament division. The options in this list are limited based on the tournament divisions that your league has enrolled in for this season. So if you don't see that option, it could be because your league has not enrolled in that tournament division, or because you already have an affidavit for that division. So once you pick your division, you'll click Start New Tournament Affidavit, and it'll take you into the process. For the sake of this video, we've already created one to kind of speed up the process a little bit. So we already have this affidavit in place, and we'll go through the steps. First step when you're creating a tournament affidavit is to verify your league officers. You're going to need to confirm the information for your league president and also for your player agent. If any of these are different or need to change, you can click here to update your league officers. If your league happens to have more than one player agent, you can actually select which player agent appears on the affidavit by clicking the Select Different Player Agent button, which will allow you to select which player agent should appear on the affidavit. Once you're done, you'll click Save and Continue to move on to the next step. For some leagues that are required to operate divisionally, you'll need to provide the name of your division for this team. Most leagues probably won't see this, but in the event that you do, this is what this will be, and you need to enter the name that you've been using for your split division before hitting Save and Continue. third step, or second, if you are not a divisional league, will be to list all the schools of any player on your team that will be using their school for eligibility verification. You do not need to list all the schools in your league, only the schools related to players on your team. It's important to know that you need to use the physical address of each school building, not the administrative offices or anything like that. It needs to be the actual physical location of the school. To add a new school, you click Add New School. You'll provide the school name, the address, city, state, and postal code. In the event that you have multiple affidavits, you'll likely have the same schools across affidavits. And so once you enter a school for the first time, you can actually add that school to any further affidavits by clicking Copy School and then selecting the school from the list, and it'll automatically add it without having to re-enter the address information. Once you're done adding schools, click Save and Continue to enter your regular season teams. These are the teams that your players played on for the regular season. And to add a new team, you'll just enter the team name, the charter division, and the number of games played by the start of the tournament. In the event of a tournament combination, you'll need to select which league the team played the regular season with. From there, you'll need to enter your manager and coach contact information. Each team will have a manager and 2 coaches. You'll just provide their name, their email, their address, and their phone number, as well as which regular season team they worked with. If they did not and you have a waiver, you can select waiver down below. If you have questions about that, please contact your district or your region office. Finally, and likely the most important part of your team, are the players on it. And so you'll need to enter the players, each player that's on your team, which will appear on your affidavit. You'll click to add a new player. You'll enter their first name, their last name, optional middle name. You'll enter their birth date, which will then do a calculation of their league age and warn you if the league age is outside the range for this tournament division. And then you'll need to select which eligibility type you'd like to use, either their parent and guardian residence or their school address. If you select parent guardian residence, you'll need to provide their address, their city, state, and their zip. If you select school, you'll need to select the school from the options entered on the previous step. From there, you'll need to select which regular season team they were part of and how many games the actual individual player played, not necessarily the number of games that the team played. If the player has a waiver for some reason, you may enter that waiver type below. Once all your players are added, you'll click Save and Continue, and it will generate the player map, which will show the league boundaries, the locations of each of the players' eligibility addresses, whether it be school or home, and a listing of that information below. You'll note that one of these addresses is showing up in red with an icon indicating that it's outside the boundary, player 8, and that is because that player's address falls just outside the boundary. If you do not have a waiver for that player, you will not be able to proceed until that is resolved. In this case, the player has a 2D waiver, which allows them to continue. You'll also see down here that this player has an approximate address match, which is just a warning to say that our system wasn't able to pinpoint the exact location of the address. It does not mean that they're ineligible. It just means that further follow-up is needed to confirm the location of that address. Once you're ready, you'll click Print to print the player map. It's important to print this out. The next step, you'll get an affidavit PDF, but the map is not part of the PDF. The map is actually a separate document, and so you'll need to make sure that you print both the map and the PDF. Once you've printed the map, you'll click Continue, and you'll get to the final step, which is to download the affidavit PDF. We're going to do a check on your behalf to make sure that there are no errors or warnings. If there are any errors on the affidavit, you will not be able to download that PDF until all the errors are resolved. If there are any warnings, such as the one that are displayed, the one that is displayed here, you'll still be able to download the PDF, but it's important to understand that there could be potential issues with your affidavit, and you should verify that with your district administrator prior to the start of the tournament. Once you're ready, you'll click Download Affidavit PDF, choose where to save it on your computer, and then we can show you what that PDF looks like up here, which has all the information that was just entered, populated automatically on the PDF. You'll need to make sure that you print this PDF, add any applicable signatures to it, district administrator signatures, etc., and then keep this with you in your tournament binder as you progress through the tournament. Nick, I think that about summarizes it, unless there's something else you'd like for me to show.
No, I think you did a wonderful job with that. You called out the change with regards to player agent, that you could select a different player agent. So that was great. Steve, I appreciate you taking the time to show us the affidavit tutorial.
Happy to help out anytime, Nick.
Well, that's going to do it for Steve and I. Just a quick few minutes to show you the affidavit. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Good luck this tournament season and take care.
All right. So can everyone still hear me? Somebody please say yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we didn't have that video last year. So I'm glad we had it this year because I actually don't have access to that part of the data center. So I couldn't really ever display for new leagues what that was going to look like or what to display. They didn't get into all the details of what needs to be in the what you guys need to input in there, but we're going to cover that now. So hopefully that was valuable, and you can go back and rewatch it as many times as you want. We included the link here in this document. So, excuse me. This is the eligibility affidavit that we just saw them create. The document is signed and certified by the league's manager, player agent, the league's president, and the district administrator, and then it will be inspected by the director of every tournament at each level that the team participates in. It contains, and we're going to go through every page of it now and just talk about the fields that get entered. This is page 1 that you just saw here. It's page 1. And this is the top part. This is all going to be filled in for you. The one thing that you need to take a look at here is if you have a combined league, there is a spots that where there are multiple leagues can be entered. So I know Newcastle softball and Newcastle Henry County baseball are going to be entering tournament combinations. So if you guys don't know how to do that, or it isn't clear when you're creating the eligibility affidavit, just get a hold of me and I'll help you go through that to make sure you got both league ID numbers in there. And here are the league ID numbers for all of the leagues in the district. This will be in the, I'll be sending everyone a PDF of this PowerPoint, so you'll have all these ID numbers at your, for you to go and use if you need them. All right, the next part is the certification by the team manager. And I'm not going to read all of this, but basically what this is saying is that the manager is certifying that the player's eligibility, he's certifying the player's eligibility, that he understands his responsibilities and that he will follow Little League rules. And that's what all of this language is up here. And he will sign on this column. The next line is for a replacement manager. That should not be filled in under any circumstances at this point. And I think I cover that a little bit more in a few minutes. All right. Next, we have on page 2 are the signatures of the president and the player agent for the league. Again, there's a lot of verbiage here, a lot of legalese. And basically what's being said here is that with these signatures, the league president and player agent are certifying that they have reviewed and approved the affidavit and the supporting document, and to the best of their knowledge and through their verification, they are showing that everything in here is true. So here are some items that need to be paid attention to. If any of the signatures are missing, the affidavit cannot be accepted. And these must be actual signatures, not typed in signatures. None of our documents will accept e-signatures. So just typing in a name isn't acceptable. They actually have to be signed. And there have been many times when I've been chasing down managers or presidents or player agents, either during or just before the first tournament game. Don't like to do that, but I'm not going to hold a team from playing in the tournament if I don't have one of these signatures. but be sure we will have them before they move on in the tournament. So we need the manager, the player agent, and the president. And as I said before, do not fill in the signature of the replacement manager. Once that is filled in, that is a permanent change, and your manager will not be permitted to return to the team. And I'm sure that you don't want that if it's not intended to be permanent. If you do have a replacement manager, get with me during the tournament, get with the tournament director, whatever level you're at. They will perform that step and fill in that for you and have the replacement managers sign. Now, at every step of the tournament, each one of the different tournaments, there needs to be a signature from that tournament director. The tournament director will go through your affidavit book just like I am going to before our district tournament. So the first signature you see here will be my signature, the district administrator signature. We don't have section tournaments in Indiana anymore. The state tournament director at whatever tournament you go to will go through your book, will verify every single page, and will sign. We don't have divisional tournaments in Indiana, but the region will do the same, and the World Series will do the same. So as I said, the tournament directors at each tournament the team participates in will review the affidavit book and sign off it just like I do. It is exceptionally important that the affidavit book and all of its contents remain in the same condition that it is in when it was approved before the start of the district tournament. I had a case once where a team used birth certificates and other things in the affidavit to go off to a travel tournament between when they finished district tournament and when they went to state. When they made it to state, they didn't have all of the information in the book that they needed, and we had to do some scrambling to get that back. Do not do this. Do not remove one paper from that book from the time that I sign off on it.
Well, he was going to get a prepaid Visa card.
I'm sorry, you're on. Please mute.
Oh, sorry. I'm on. I'm sorry.
Okay. So as I was saying, don't take anything out of the book for any reason. All right. As I said, if any of the documents are removed or lost, it is possible that a state, region, or even World Series director could reject the individual players or the whole team. All right. In Indiana District 6, we very heavily scrutinize the affidavit books, and we do this to protect our families from possible rejection at a state, regional, or World Series tournament. Families spend a significant amount of time and money to travel to these tournaments. It would be a huge disservice on our part and a failure if we allowed a player to go to one of these events without properly validated documentation and possibly not be allowed to play. And this has happened before. And it's not fun. We had it happen at our regional 2 years ago. 2 players, in fact, weren't allowed to play in the entire tournament because they did not have the documentation that they needed. They should never have been. One of them, in fact, should not have been allowed to play in the league that they played in because they were from way out of their boundary. And so we don't want to put that on our families, especially if they're traveling many hours to go to one of these tournaments, spending money for gas and hotel rooms. We need to get it right at this level, and we need to make sure it's right. So I'm not picking on you guys if I send something back to you. We're just making sure that we have it right for our families, because it doesn't look good on any of us if kids aren't allowed to play. We also do this out of respect to the tournament directors of the state, regional, and World Series tournament. They have to review these books prior to team's participation. Ryan Bain can attest to the fact that before the state tournament we had a couple of years ago in Newcastle, where we had a lot of issues with the books. It is very high stress situation when you have to tell a player, or in that case, we had whole teams that didn't have a single document that was right. And then you have to go back and tell them, all right, you got 2 hours to collect all this data to be eligible to play. And that's no fun at all. But you would be amazingly surprised at how quickly they can get that stuff. When you are asking parents before the district tournament here, when you're making your books to get you that data, it's going to drag out and it's going to seem like forever for them to get you the book, that stuff. But we've seen it done in less than 2 hours to have an entire team put together. So that's why we so heavily scrutinize this, so we don't have to put ourselves, our tournament directors, our families, our teams in that kind of situation. All right, so now we're going to move on to page 3, which are the regular season teams. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this page, but as they were telling you, because this is going to be all auto-filled, but you'll put in the team name, the regular season team name, how many games that team has played by the start of the tournament, and it better be 12 because that's the minimum. More than 12, of course, is great, but it better be at least 12. Senior League does not have any minimum, so they don't have to put 12 in there. They can put 0, but you should put in how many games the Senior League has played, the division, and then the league ID number. And in the case of combination leagues, there are different ways to do combinations, and some of them, a league will actually, a combined league will actually send a whole team to play in a league with another league. And in that case, if you have a whole team, then you would put the ID number of the league that team represents. For our leagues, I think we're pretty much doing, well, there will be one. I think the Newcastle Hagerstown softball 8, 9, 10-year-old combination will have a team like that. But for Newcastle Henry County and for majors at Newcastle softball and Hagerstown softball, those are true combined leagues where all the players play in one league. And in that case, all the teams would have the ID numbers for Newcastle Henry County, for example. So here's some things about page 3. The information about the regular season team for each player on the affidavit must be reported. You put in the regular season team names, games played at the start of the tournament, minimum of 12. And here are the regular season division names for you to enter. I don't think it gives you a drop down. It should, so that it's consistent, but these are the names that the Little League wants to see in there. And then, of course, the league ID numbers. The next thing that gets entered on page 3 are managers and coaches. And that's just their name, email address. The team code is going to match up to what one of the teams that shows up in here. So you see there's a code here, A, B, C, D, E. So that's what will go in this team code. And then the day phone and mobile home phone. So here are the eligibility rules for a manager and coach in the international tournament. District administrators and district staff are not permitted to be tournament managers or coaches. League presidents and player agents are not allowed to either, but they may with a waiver from the district administrator. And I will always sign one of these waivers for a president or player agent that wants to be a manager or coach in the district tournament. It is important to realize that managers and coaches must come from an appropriate division. So for the 8, 9, 10, and 9, 10, 11-year-old divisions, the managers and coaches must be managers or coaches from a regular season, a Little League minor, or Little League majors division team. For the major or intermediate tournament, the managers and coaches must be managers or coaches from a regular season Little League major or intermediate 50-70 division team. And let me be a little bit clearer with that. If they coached in intermediate 50-70 or majors, they would be eligible to be a manager or coach on either one of those divisional teams. And then for juniors and seniors, managers and coaches must be managers or coaches from regular season junior league or senior league team. So if you've got a junior league and you want your manager to come from a senior league team, that's fine. And this can be found in the rule book under tournament organization / managers and coaches. So one other thing, if you cannot fill your coaching staffs with coaches that meet those criteria, please talk to me. And there are waivers that can be approved to allow the manager coach not from an appropriate division to be the manager coach of a team. What that basically requires is a sign off from every other manager and coach in the division saying that they don't want to do it. And then we'll be able to use manager or coach from a different division. And I have had to do that before. It's not a whole lot of fun, but we got it done. Moving on with the eligibility for managers and coaches. For a manager or coach to coach in the district tournament or Little League tournament in general, they have to have completed Diamond Leader training, but they only have to do that once. So if you've got a certificate from a past year, those are accepted. And I've included a link here for the Diamond Leader training so that you can go out and complete that so that your coaches can go out and complete that if they haven't done it already. Additionally, they have to have completed USA Baseball Abuse Awareness training. And their completion certificate or a sign-in sheet from a group training must be carried in the affidavit book as well. And this is what the certificate looks like. I've got a link to the training, and it doesn't matter which one of these certifications they take. They just have to have a certificate showing they completed one of them. Now, USA Baseball is one form of abuse awareness training. There are others. If you have a certificate from another abuse awareness training, please talk to me about it. We'll make sure that it's acceptable to Little League to meet their requirement for abuse awareness training. It's easiest to just do the USA Baseball. It takes about an hour. It's free, and here's the link. So are there any questions about anything I've covered so far? Lisa, are there any questions that have been placed in the chat?
No, nothing in the chat so far.
And no one online has any questions? Okay, we're going to move on then. All right. Playing on multiple tournament teams. This is something that was new last year or the year before. Players may participate on more than one tournament team in a season. However, players may not be on more than one affidavit at a time. Players may not be placed on a second tournament team affidavit until their original tournament team is eliminated. So if you've got plans of doing this with a player, let's say that, and I'm not remembering how the schedule I've started works out, but say they started out playing on a 8, 9, 10 team, and they're a 10-year-old, and that team is still playing in the tournament. They're not eligible to be moved up to the majors team until that 8, 9, 10 team is eliminated. Additionally, players may not be named to a second tournament team even, and they may not practice with that team either until the original tournament team is eliminated. Very important things to take into consideration if you've got any intent of doing this. And we have had teams do it. So we're moving on the actual eligibility affidavit to the player names. And there are some pitfalls in these areas as well. It's not just as simple as entering the player name. Or it is as simple as entering the player names, but there are ways that it can be messed up. The player name should be as it appears on the birth record. If nicknames are used, they must be relatable to the birth record. If you put on the affidavit that the player name is Skip Mills, and I get a birth certificate that says the player is Julian Mills, I have no way of knowing that Julian is Skip. So the player name you enter here on the affidavit has to be relatable to the birth record. Okay,
I have a question, Jim.
go ahead.
So I have a player in my league that he is a foster kid, and his real last name is Beckley. But due to safety concerns, the parents have requested that his last name be McKee on any documents. Is there, and I'm not saying that this kid is going to make the All-Star team. I'm just saying if he does, how do I handle that?
Let me double check with the region office and make sure that we do that correctly. All right.
I mean, the parents are okay with his documents saying Beckley, but like for announcements and stuff, like when he comes up to bat, they don't want it to say Beckley.
All right. What we would do in that case to make it the easiest, and I am going to still check with the region office to see how this should be handled. But I'll show you a little later the player information sheet. We would just put the name he prefers to be known as on the player information sheet. And then on the affidavit, we would have his real name. But I do want to make sure we get this straight. So I will. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Anybody else have a question about this? All right, we'll move on. All right. What goes in here in entering on the data center has eliminated a lot of the problems with this. They kind of take some of the error out of it. But what goes in here needs to be the guardian's address or the address of the player's school. And it has to be consistent with what's on all the other affidavit documents. And we'll talk about that in a little more detail later, but it used to be somebody'd fill in the player's home address here, but they'd be using a school form. And that's not accurate because the school is the player's residence. If you're using a school form, if they're using the home address, then the home address goes in here. If they're using the school address goes in there. All right, the player's birth date from the birth record, and it needs to be consistent with all other affidavit book documents. Please make sure you have the birth date correct from the birth certificate. Every year there's at least one or more, but there's at least one where the birth date does not match the birth certificate, and then that has to be changed. The residence inside the boundary, that's something that gets, I believe this gets auto-filled now by whether or not the kid's actually in the boundary or not, depending on what address you put in. If it's not in the boundary, then there has to be a waiver. The team code, just like what we showed for the coaches, this will be the team that the player played on in the regular season. The number of regular season teams the player participated in for the tournament team. This needs to meet the minimum. And I think we talk about this in more detail here. Yeah, right here. All right. players need to have a minimum of 8 games participated in. That's 60% of 12 in the regular season for all divisions except for senior. Senior does not have any minimum participation. Let's see. If they participated in a school program, they could be eligible to be excused from some of those games. And I think I talk about that more in detail on a future slide, but I'm going to talk about it here. Participating on a travel team, other school sports or clubs don't qualify for this exception. Only school sponsored baseball or softball count. Doesn't have to be IHSAA. It's a school sponsored baseball or softball team. Players granted this exception will be required to play in 60% of the league regular season games they are available to play on. So if, for example, their school team kept them from being at 6 of the 12 regular season games, they would only have to meet 60% of 6 games. Okay. There is a very similar waiver for injured players. We must have a doctor's excuse documenting the first date when the player was injured. Must have the doctor's release documenting the date the player could return. And then we need a copy of the player's league team schedule so that we can figure out how many games they were not available for. And if you run into one of these situations, just get with me and I'll make sure that we get it all correct. School players, we talked about that already, but the documentation that's going to be required for them we must have the school's team roster showing the player on the team. We need to have a copy of the player's school team schedule so we can see when they would not be available. Must have a copy of the player's league team schedule. And then for school teams, there's a supplemental affidavit that gets included with the rest of the affidavit. It's my responsibility to fill this out, but that's what it looks like down here. Does anybody have any questions about school teams and injuries before we move on? I don't want to take a whole lot of time on that, but okay, we will move on. All right, the next thing that goes in is auto-filled is the birth date. Like I said, be sure not to get the birth date wrong. And then waivers. If this column here, residence or school inside boundary map is no, one of these has to be filled. Either Regulation 2D, Regulation 4D, or Charter Committee. And any waivers that should be found, to support. I don't know if that sentence is good, but anybody that's outside the boundary map has to have a waiver. That's basically all I'm intending to say there. All right, then the last boxes for the player are initials and date approved. Those are for me. Please do not fill in these boxes. I have had player agents fill in these boxes before showing their approval. And if that happens, I don't have a place to sign. So please don't do that. I'll have to reprint the pages. Any question about anything with the player boxes before we move forward? All right, you will be entering most of this information, if not all of it, on the data center when you prepare your affidavit. All right, it is possible to replace a player. If you replace a player, you have to have room on your roster to do it. Does that make any sense? No. If you replace a player, it's a permanent replacement. So what happens when we replace a player? is the original player that's on the affidavit gets scratched out, big black Sharpie supposed to be used, so you can't see anything about that player anymore. And then that player's information is removed from the affidavit. Then everything that is collected for the replacement player has to be just like it would have been if they were originally on the team. Now, if you've got room on your affidavit, let's say you have 12 kids originally and you got 2 spots left, I always recommend adding the player instead of replacing the player that is no longer going to be with your team. Okay. We've had to do that before also. Now, earlier we talked about coaches replacement and signing that replacement manager. This is where that actually gets done. And you can have a temporary coach or a temporary manager for a single game. But this is something that the tournament director has to fill out and approve. And we would put in there the name, the email address, the team code. The replacement coach has to meet all of the requirements of the original team coach, including having completed Diamond Leader and abuse awareness. So we would just fill in their data there. And then this P or T represents permanent or temporary, and then the date. If it's permanent, then the original coach would not be permitted to return to the team. These are permanent if we use permanent. Temporary, then you can have the coach return. If it's the manager, then we have to also have that permanent manager replacement sign on that page 2 where the manager signs. Okay. But just nobody, when you're creating your affidavit, worry about any of these boxes. We take care of this when it happens. Okay, then the last pages of the affidavit are the pitching log. Please do not remove these from your affidavit. They are exceptionally important to have with it. You won't be filling anything in on them when you turn in your affidavit, but we have to have those because they get filled in after every single tournament game. The manager has to sign this after every single game, showing that they've reviewed the pitch log, both baseball and softball. And if they're not there, I have to go scramble and try and find some to put in there. So please do not remove these. That has been an issue in the past. All right, so we're done with the affidavit itself. Any questions about that before we move forward? All right, we will move on to the documents required to support the eligibility affidavit. And this is the big thing that you guys are all going to be collecting. By rule, the items that must be in there are the tournament map, which we've already discussed. Well, actually, the video discussed it. We haven't discussed it yet. The tournament player verification form, which at the very end of the video, they scroll down and you got to look at those. But if you're a new league, you probably wouldn't have recognized that. But this is a very important document. The birth records, the residency record or school residency records, and then any waivers. So we're going to look at the league boundary map first. This is a map of the actual boundary of the league, signed and dated by the league president and district administrator, with locations plotted for the residence or school of every player named on the affidavit. In the good old days, we had to make these maps ourselves and plot the kid's location ourselves. We're very lucky to have the data center do it for us now, because those maps were always difficult to create and usually a mess. And for these maps to be approved by Little League, the DA and the president have to sign them. And like I said earlier, all signatures on this thing have to be actual signatures, not typed in. So this is an old version of what the map used to look like, but it's close enough. This was Cambridge City's map back for their last junior league team. Here you can see what their boundary looked like back then. Each player is plotted, and then below it, and I've got the names of the players blacked out, but all these were school addresses, so it shows the well, I think I've blotted out sort of part of the address too here, but it shows Cambridge City. So it shows the type of residency, school, or it would show home, and it shows that they are in the boundary, and none of these kids needed a waiver. But I know we saw in the video examples of what that looked like when they did. Here, the league president hadn't signed yet when I created this, and there's my signature. Like I said, this is all created for you. The only thing that's going to be needed are the signatures. Any questions about the boundary map? There probably shouldn't be any, but are there any questions? All right. So here's the tournament player verification form, or TPV as we typically call it. It will be created when you print out your affidavit for every single player on your team. And a lot of it's going to be auto-filled. The Little League player verification form is required for each player participating in the Little League International Tournament team. The tournament player verification form is a tool that is used to help leagues and districts save time throughout the verification process. So once completed, the proofs of residency or school residency must be kept with the TPV and retained for potential use in future seasons. So once you get this approved, you keep your school form or other forms of residency proof with it, and you don't get rid of it, because in a future season, you may be able to use this thing again and not have to gather those proofs from the parents again. A legal guardian of the player, the league president, the district administrator must sign off on this, verifying that the information is accurate. All right, as I was saying, once approved, the TPV form may be used by the player for the duration of his or her player Little League career, which the form says they may, but and most Little League training says, you can use it for the rest of the career, but that's not always the fact. If there are no changes to the player's residency, it is not necessary to submit a new TPV form for subsequent years of international tournament play. So for example, if you use the home residency and they never move from that home, you can use that TPV and the residency verification that comes that you get with it to verify it from the time that they are 8-year-old to the time they're 16-year-old. But most players anymore don't use the home form because it's the harder way of doing things. If a player moves outside of the league boundaries, a Regulation 2D form and the supporting documentation will need to be added to that. And as in most cases these days, if a player uses a school form and they change schools, remembering that you have to use the address of the school building, not the administration building. So if they're at elementary school and the elementary school building is not in the exact same building and has the exact same address as the middle school, when they move from elementary school to middle school or from middle school to high school, you're going to need both a new school form and a new TPV form. So these are examples of when you would need a new TPV form. Do I have any questions about that before we move on? Okay, it is 11 o'clock. I'm fine without a break. Does anyone else need a break? All right. Since nobody's speaking up, we're just going to move forward. I am going to take a drink though. All right. So this is the top part of the TPV form. All of this is going to be auto-filled, I believe. There is one part here that isn't auto-filled, and that is the type of age proof. Okay. I prefer to fill this in myself when I verify the birth certificate for the player. When I do verify this, I will check in this Board of Health certificate here. And then off to the side, I will sign my name and the date that I verified it. And the reason I do that is so that in future years, you're not going to need to collect a birth certificate from the player's family. And we'll talk about that later. If you fill it in, it's no big deal, but I like to fill it in myself because it just, when I'm checking things, if that's not checked, I know that I didn't check it. So that's just a personal thing. All right, so next we move on to the player or guardian area. This address will be auto-filled for you. I did confirm that. If you are using a home address. Now, these other things are the proofs that we will talk about when we're talking about residency proof. The groupings and the items that need to be collected. There needs to be one of these items from each one of these three groups. Like with the birth certificate box, I like to fill these in myself because a lot of times they get filled in incorrectly. And so I prefer to fill these in when I'm validating. If you fill them in, it's no big deal. It's just a preference of mine. I prefer to fill these in. Now, if you are using a school address, none of this should be filled in. Here's the area on the TPV for the school form. The address of the school is filled in. And the Little League school attendance form completed by the school administrator is the box that should be checked if we're using the Little League form. I've always had a little confusion about that, but I checked, and that is the box that needs to be filled. Sorry. The school address, now this is an important part of this. The school address that you put in there must match the address on the school form. And I also put in here that you should not use both the guardian address, which was the previous slide, and the school address in here. Which I have had these filled in with the school form address, and then the player agent's gone in and written in the address of the guardian. Please don't do that. That adds to confusion. Okay. Then at the bottom will be signatures. These are very important signatures. The player will not be verified unless all three of them are there. First one is the parent or legal guardian. The next one is the league president. And the next one is the district administrator. This is my actual sign off that the player is verified to play in the district tournament or the international tournament in general. They can't play in the tournament without the parent, president, and the district administrator. And I have been running around during the middle of tournament games getting parent signatures. So please make sure you get them. Again, this form does not accept electronic signatures. It must be the real thing. All right, here are common mistakes on the TPV. Filling in both the residency proof and the school enrollment, which I think I hit on pretty good. Mislabeling the document types in the residency proof, which is why I like to put them in myself. Birth dates that don't match the affidavit, which shouldn't be a thing because they both get auto-populated. So that's probably one we don't have to worry about anymore. We would have to worry about it if the birth date did not match the birth certificate, which does happen. And then missing signatures, type signatures, or signatures on the wrong line. Like, for example, the parent would sign the president line. Questions before we move forward? Okay. All right. Go ahead.
You don't have to have the school form filled out for the 8U, right? For the coach's pitch?
No, that isn't a good question. Coach's pitch is not part of the international tournament. Okay. So we do not create eligibility affidavits for the coach's pitch tournament. Anything that's part of the international tournament, we do need an affidavit. So that would be the 8, 9, 10 tournament, the 9, 10, 11 tournament, the majors tournament, the junior tournament, and the senior tournament. Okay. So we don't, what we will ask for the coaches pitch tournament will be simply birth certificate showing that they're the age they say they are. And then we have always gone on the honesty of the league president that the player actually played in their league and is eligible to be in that league by their boundary for the coaches pitch tournament. Does anybody have any questions about that? Getting a little froggy here. Sorry. All right. All right. Moving forward. Birth records. All right. This is something that came from Nina Johnson Pitt, who used to be our Central Region Director, and now she's the Senior Strategy Executive for Little League. This is a quote from her. Prior to placing their signature on the affidavit or original proof of age documents, they must be personally inspected by the local Little League president, the player agent, and the district administrator or an appointed designee, because some districts are so large that the district administrator doesn't actually look at these some of these affidavit books. And that's usually where the problems come from. The document, so they have to review the birth certificate, and then the document should then be returned to the parents or the player. Parents primarily. You don't want to trust the kids with it. Little League stopped requiring that copies be carried with the affidavit because in many states, and Indiana is one, it is not legal to photocopy birth certificates. And we obviously don't want to require people to break the law. Or we don't want people to have this valuable document that gives information about their child to be out of their possession and for us to be responsible for it for any period of time. Sorry about the frogginess. It's going to sound real good on the recording. So here's the procedure that we've been using. If the player is using a legal TPV form from a previous year and the district administrator has marked that the birth certificate was verified, you do not need to send the birth certificate for re-verification. So like I stated when we were looking at the TPV, I will check that box. I will sign my name and the date that I verified it. That is proof that back on that previous year, I looked at the birth certificate and verified the kid's birth date, right? So if it's there on the TPV, I don't need the birth certificate again. If you're submitting a new TPV that hasn't been verified by me, and that includes ones where you needed a new TPV from a previous year, please send the birth certificates. All right. So if the TPV is new and has not been reviewed by the DA, you need to send the birth certificate for review. And this is how leagues have done it in the past. Leagues will typically put them in a large envelope, send them with the affidavit book to the DA for review. Once I review them, as I said, I sign the TPV. Once the book is completely reviewed, I return that envelope to the league president, so that the birth certificates can be returned to the parents or guardians. Birth certificates must not stay in the affidavit book during the tournament. And this is an issue we run into every year, where we've got that envelope stuck in the tournament affidavit, and they'll go through the entire tournament with it in there. And I don't like that. I don't like having those important documents with personal information about the kids to be in my possession or in the district's possession any longer than possible. So when they get reviewed, I will give those envelopes back to the president. Please make sure that birth certificates get returned to the families. Now, we did talk about Lisa, your hand is raised. What's your question?
Yes, there's a question in the chat. Can we use a passport for a player in place of a birth certificate?
All right. We're going to get to that in just a minute. So I will answer that question in a minute, if that's all right. What I was starting to say, and I'm probably going to cover that, what I'm starting to say on this next slide as well. Yeah, I will. Now, when we read that quote from Nina, it talked about Indiana not allowing you to legally make a photocopy of a birth certificate. I'll be absolutely honest, probably half the birth certificates I get to review are photocopies. I'm not going to turn those away. Okay. So if your parents don't feel comfortable submitting the actual birth certificate and they make a photocopy of it and hand you a photocopy, I'm not going to reject that. Okay. Just for your knowledge. But Lisa?
Yeah, there's another question in the chat about whether you can use a photo instead of a photocopy.
What a lot of leagues will do, especially if I get the affidavit book for review and a kid is missing a birth certificate, they'll take a picture of it on their phone and they'll text it to me. So yeah, I won't reject those either. All right. Any other questions before I move forward? All right. Now, we talked about photocopies and pictures, but there are only certain things that are acceptable as birth records. All right. So it needs to be an original proof of age document if issued by federal, state, or provincial registrars of vital statistics in the country of which the little leaguer is participating. The country of participation, if the country differs from the proof of age, I shouldn't read this because I'm just going to get messed up. Basically, we're just going to skip down to the bottom. The only thing that's acceptable is the birth certificate. So we're going to look at what's not acceptable down here. Baptismal certificates are not acceptable. Certificates of blessing, certificate of dedication, circumcision, hospital certificates. That's what I see a lot of, is a hospital certificate with a little stork on it. those aren't real birth certificates and they're not acceptable. It's a souvenir from the hospital. Okay. They say photocopies. I will accept photocopies. And then passports. Passports are not acceptable. It's got to be an actual birth certificate. Now, I believe that farther up on here, we were talking about, or maybe it's on the next page, they talk about foreign birth certificates. I've seen birth certificates from all over the world in my day doing this. I've seen them from Russia. I've seen them from Japan. I've seen them from Poland. I've seen them from all over the place. That's what is preferred. If you do run into a case where you've got a player from that was born not in the United States, and there is an issue with them not having a valid birth certificate from their country of birth, then get with me as soon as possible, and we'll see how we need to approach that. Okay, because passports are one of the things on the not acceptable list. All right, any questions about that? Did I answer all the questions? Okay, so ways to obtain a birth certificate. Basically, as we said, the only acceptable document is a state-issued birth certificate. If the parent or guardian claims they do not have the birth certificate, there are places that they can obtain one. They can go directly to the county courthouse in the state or country where the player was born. They can also get one online from the Indiana Department of Health, or online, they can order one from the CDC. And there are 2 links where they can go and get those done. If they don't have birth certificates, I suggest that they start working on this now, because it does take some time to get that ordered and delivered. I will say that we have had parents that say they do not have birth certificates. They couldn't, and we, in some cases, we've ended up going to the school, especially when we have a good relationship with the principal of the school. Schools have to have the birth certificates. So the parent did have a birth certificate at some time, or some acceptable form of proof for the school. We've had principals look in the player's school record. They can see the birth certificate and they can verify the proof for us. And we did that with Newcastle last year. I'm not going to say it's going to work every time, but to go to school in Indiana, you have to have some form of proof of what your birth date is. Any questions? Both these links work. I tried them both. All right. So with no questions about the birth records, we're going to move on to the residency records. First one we're going to talk about is, well, this is just a general statement about a player will be deemed to reside within the league boundaries. Oh, sorry, I might be getting a question here. No. All right, I'm sorry. All right, this specific part, and I am sending you this entire document with the handouts of what is of the residency and the age requirements for Little League. But this specific area deals with home residences. So a player will be deemed to reside within the Little League boundary if his or her parents are living together or apart and are residing within such league boundary, or the players are or court-appointed guardian reside within the boundary. So it could be that the player's mom and dad are divorced and they live apart. One or both of them live in the boundary. If they both live in the boundary, they can use either of the parents' residence as their home resident, Obviously, if one doesn't live inside the boundary, they need the one that does. It's got to be the court appointed legal guardian. So if they live with their grandparents and the grandparent is not the legal guardian and the parents do not live with them, you cannot use that grandparent's address. I've had that happen before. It's got to be the legal guardian or their original parents. And so foster kids, for example, those are the court-appointed legal guardians. And of course, it has to be within inside the boundary. So it just goes on and talks more about that. And then it says that it's got to be supported by 3 documents and that the documents need to be dated or enforced. And we'll talk about this more in detail in a minute. Between February 1st, 2023 and February 1st, 2024. And that's where a lot of the issues come in with getting these residencies at this point of the game. All right, so here, as we showed on the TPV form, are the groups and the documents that you would need to gather one of these from each of the groups. All right. So for group 1, it's driver's license, school records, vehicle records, employment records or insurance documents. Group 2 is welfare, child care records, federal records, state records, municipal records, support payment records, homeowner or tenant records, military records. Group 3 is voter registration, utility bills, financial records, medical records, or internet, cable, or satellite records, which internet and cable TV are not considered to be a utility by Little League. So those are separate, but they're both group 3. So please note that some of these documents can be used in multiple groups. For example, a vehicle record can be both considered a group 1 vehicle record or a group 2 state record. However, there are a couple things that are specified that can't be used like that. For example, driver's license, even though it's a state record, can only be considered a group 1. It can't be considered a state record. Voter's registration, same thing. I think those are the only 2 examples of those: voter's registration and driver's license. There are some things like a municipal utility bill could be considered a local municipal record or a utility bill. Or the vehicle record could be considered a vehicle registration, vehicle record, or state record. Okay? Any questions about those? Okay. So the things that have to be on these proofs, one from each of the 3 groups, and I don't think I said this, but it needs to be stated that it has to be one from each of the groups. If you give me 2 utility bills, unless one of them can be used as a municipal record, those are 2 group 3s. If you give me a driver's license from mom and a driver's license from dad, those are 2 group 1s. Those, I can only use one of those. All right. So back to this page. Each document must have all of the following clearly visible on it, or the document will be rejected. You have to have the legal guardian's name. And as we talked about, you can choose, if you have a split family and the mom and dad both live in the boundary, you can choose one of those, but you can't have driver's license from dad, utility bill from mom, if the addresses are different, okay? You got to have the same address. So you have to have the legal guardian's name, the legal guardian's address. Those Those have to be very clearly visible. And the documents must display a date on them that's between February 1st, 2023, February 1st, 2024. So if you have a utility bill and it's from June 2024, it's going to get rejected. It has to be a utility bill between February 1st, 2023 and February 1st, 2024. That's the Little League rules for accepting this. If the document is something like a driver's license, it has to have been valid and not expired between February 1st, 2023 and February 1st, 2024. All right. Any questions about those? This single thing right here is the hardest part of validating an affidavit book. It's the place where the most mistakes are made. And I thank God for the school form, because most people use the school form now. And there can still be mistakes on the school form, but it's nothing like this. Back 10 years ago, this was our only option, and it was a nightmare. So thank goodness I got the school form. But we still have to use these in some cases, and we still run into issues. So if you follow these rules and you have the correct one item from each of the three, you're gonna, I'm not gonna say 100% you're gonna be approved, because there's can always be some things that I'm not thinking of, but 99% you're gonna be good. Okay. All right. So most common mistakes for the residency records: multiple documents from the same group, which we talked about, documents from outside the February to February date ranges, address on document doesn't match the player's address on the affidavit, the person on the document is not the player's legal guardian, or the document doesn't have all the necessary items on it: the name, the address, and the date. Okay, questions before we move on to school? Lisa, is there anything in the chat?
No questions in the chat.
Okay, we'll move on to school residency records. This is also on that document I'll be sending you. It just talks about that there are schools that count and there are schools that don't count. So it's got to be the physical location of the school where the player attends classes, and that needs to be within the boundary of your local league. And it notes that excluded schools are home schools, they don't count. Cyber schools don't count. Sports related schools don't count. Sports academies don't count. Preschools don't count. Or any after school programs where the child goes after their primary school. Okay. School attendance refers to a place of physical location where the player attends school during the traditional academic year. And this is where the majority of the issues happen with the school form. They have to be dated prior to October 1st of 2023. Not on October 1st, not after October 1st, before. Okay. So let's go on and we'll look at the school form. We talked about the school form back in when we talked about registration and things to look out for, and how to train your principal or league administrator. And this is my good old happy little Bart Simpson school form. You'll need to show the league name and the league ID, the player name, and their birth date. Then this section of it is the parent or guardian address, which is very important. This does not have to be within the boundary, by the way, because the school form is residence that is for the school. And then the signature and the date. It must be the guardian's actual address. It must be signed with a real signature and dated. And please be sure the printed name is there, because sometimes these signatures, you can't tell what they've scribbled on there. It needs to be signed by the parent or the guardian, not the league president, not the player agent as well. Okay. And it needs to be a legal guardian, not a grandparent or somebody like that. All right, moving on. This is where the majority of the problems happen. When you guys just hand one of these off to the school administrator, and then they just start putting things in. But this is the way it needs to be done. It must be the actual school the player attends, not the administration building. All right, so if they go to Springfield Elementary School, not Springfield Middle School, it needs to be Springfield Elementary. It needs to be the name of the administrator, the actual address, and please put in the full address. A lot of times I will get just the street address and not Springfield, Indiana. The phone number, full phone number with area code. Player's name, the year that the current school year, the year that the player that this is for. So we don't want, if the player, if this is a new school form for 2023-24 and the player first enrolled back in 2019, I don't want to see 2019 in there. Okay, we need to have 2023-24 because that's when this school form is for. Then we need to have the actual date where they were enrolled, when they were enrolled. And my sister's an administrator of school. I know they have this every single year, and you can go in and you can see when they have enrolled for this current year. And so you will put that date on there, or you won't, the administrator will. It's a date of the actual enrollment for the 2023-24 school year. No date after 9/30/2023 will be accepted. It needs to be the full date, meaning month, day, year, putting in just the year, which is a common thing. They put in 23 or 24, 2023 or 2024 in there. It's not acceptable. Also, month and year is not acceptable. Okay. I would probably, I'll tell you what, I probably would accept 8/2023, but that's not what we really want. Okay. I'm not, just for the sake of timing, I probably wouldn't turn that down. And I haven't in the past, but that's really not what we want. And it needs to be signed, dated, and their title needs to be on there. On these documents here, you'll notice that I've got some of the things circled in red. Leagues have often pre-filled these forms before they print them out en masse and give them to the families to initiate, and then they go to the school and they've pre-filled. Sometimes I've had, and I rejected all these, by the way, October 1st, 2019, for example, was typed in here. Don't do that. There are some fields that should be pre-filled for the sake of ease. For example, the league name and the league ID are two things that the parent, they should know the league name, but they won't know the league ID. So pre-fill that. And then if it's a new school form, you should pre-fill the school year just so it doesn't get messed up. Put in 2023-24. And then I've got down here, must be the address of the actual school building where the player attends. We already covered that. and enrolled as of date must be before October 1st, 2023. Do not pre-fill this date. Okay, common school form mistakes. Unauthorized people filling out or signing the school administrator area. This must be someone who is authorized to sign on behalf of the school corporation or the school. For example, the superintendent, principal, or vice principal. I've accepted athletic director before as well. Those are all, yes. Also, if you have an administrative secretary to the superintendent who's authorized the school to sign on behalf of the school, I've accepted those as well. I think most of Newcastle Little Leagues come from a secretary, but she is authorized by the school corporation. Teachers, janitors, bus drivers, all of which I've gotten before, those are big no. Okay, it's got to be an administrator. Other mistakes: using the address of the school's administration building instead of the player's actual school address. That's a big one that happens every year. Or forms for players who will attend the school in the future. For example, they're in nursery school this year. They're going to attend the school next year for the 24-25 school year, and get a form for the 24-25 school year. Those are not acceptable. It's got to be for the 23-24 school year. Now, we'll finish the mistakes and then I'll talk about this other exception. Other mistakes: invalid dates in this student must be enrolled in as of. It must be before October 1st, 2023. It should be the real student enrollment date for the current year. No date after September 30th will be accepted. It must be the full date. We already covered that. Other mistakes: leaving fields blank or forms not being signed, type signatures. Again, this form does not accept e-signatures. Now, one thing I want to note, we talked about specifically the 2023-24 school form for new school forms, but for a lot of kids who registered at your league in the past, they have a school form already. If they have not changed schools, meaning they're still in one of the elementary schools and they haven't moved up to the middle school yet, they can continue to use that form. So if you send me a form from the 2022-23 school year and everything's correct on it, all the dates are right on it, it's from before October 1st of 2022, for example, I'll accept that. That's perfectly legal. But just be aware that a lot of 12-year-old kids have moved up to middle school, and I may be questioning whether or not they've moved up to the middle school yet if they're still listed in elementary school. And I certainly will if it's a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old, and their school residence is being listed as an elementary school. All right. So are there any questions about the school forms before we move on? All right, we're going to move on. Waivers. All right. A waiver is something that allows a player who lives outside of your league boundary to play in your league. The first one we're going to talk about is a Regulation 2D waiver. This waiver allows a player who had previously qualified for a league under residency rules to remain in the league with full eligibility after moving out of the residence or to an out-of-boundary residence or school. Now, the condition on that is that they have to remain in the league and have uninterrupted league participation. So if they played in your league 2 years ago and are moved out of boundary and came back and want to play in your league this year, they've got a year there where they had interrupted service. So we can't do a regulation 2D for them. Or if they, 2 years ago, they played in your league. Last year, they got a regulation 2D. This year, they don't play in your league. Next year, that regulation 2D waiver will be invalid. Okay. So I think I talked more about that here. As soon as a player who had been granted a regulation 2D waiver skips a season, which Little League calls breaking service, then the waiver becomes void. Residency proofs, the residency proofs used to validate the regulation 2D waiver from the last year the player's residence or school was inside the boundary must always be kept with this for it to remain valid as well. So when we validate one of these, the school form is required, and it will stay with this forever after that. Or the 3 proofs documents that we talked about when talking about a home residence. If those documents, those proofs get separated from the regulation 2D waiver, it's no longer valid. And unfortunately, I've had that happen way too many times where just the regulation 2D waiver will be sent in the affidavit book. They know the league no longer has the proof of residence, and so that regulation 2D form is no longer valid. Now, fortunately, in most cases, the leagues have been able to go back and have the parent get the exact same documents off online or something like that to make the regulation 2D waiver valid again, but there's been at least where they couldn't. And so if you're going to send these to me for the tournament, please make sure you send them with the original proofs of residency or the original school form that was used when I signed off on this. And I don't know if I talk about it. Well, I might here. I'll continue before talking about this additional item. All right, the waiver can also be used for siblings of a player who qualified under eligibility under regulation 2D. So say the sibling never played in your league. When the older sibling did, the older sibling has a regulation 2D, but the younger sibling isn't in your league boundary, you can have a regulation 2D waiver for that younger sibling. And there's a section in there where you cite that it's a sibling of a player who qualifies under regulation 2D. Okay. Now, this document is assembled by the district administrator. I do that to avoid errors instead of having the league president do it. And then the league provides the supporting documents. And this isn't something that gets signed off by the charter committee or by the region. This is one that is signed off by the district administrator. The Little League only gets involved with these if we run into issues like missing documentation and things like that. All right. So common mistakes on the regulation 2D waiver: missing supporting documents. As we said, that must be accompanied by the supporting documents to be valid. Filling in both the address of the school and the home address. It's very confusing if both of those are filled in as to just what is trying to be done. So that's another reason why I fill these out to start with, and just and if something changes on them, like these get filled in, then I'll reject them and we'll start again. And then submitting forms for players who have broken service. Any questions about regulation 2D? All right. Next one is charter committee waivers, which we've talked about a lot in the preseason, and some of you have actually gone through this process. But this is a special waiver from the charter committee that allows a player, well, there are lots of kinds of charter committee waivers. The ones you guys have been familiar with to this point are when a player is outside. But there can also be things for teams or even rules, regular season rules where the charter committee can rule, and a charter committee waiver can be used for that. For the affidavit book, we're primarily going to be concerned with player residency. And so what would happen is the charter committee says, all right, this guy's outside the boundary. We're going to give them residency, a residency waiver that allows them to be in the boundary. What has typically been their stance is that for the first year of the waiver, and recently it's been for both if a player lives in the boundary of another little league or if they live in a area that is not part of any little league. First year has been what they call a red shirt season. They grant regular season only eligibility. The next season, they will grant full league eligibility where they can participate in the tournament as well. Recently, they've been asking that we do things like combine leagues to get around this, but for charter committee kids, you have to read what it says on here. And if you can see this, it says pretty clearly for this player who I've marked out, but this is one from this season, 2024 regular season only. And then down later, it will say if they play in the 25 season, they'll be granted full eligibility. Okay. So, any questions about charter committee waivers before we move on? And I do list examples of different types of charter committee waivers that are necessary. All right. So I explain a little bit further here that this type of waiver must be submitted to the central region by the district administrator. The regional director then presents the waiver to the charter committee and they rule on it. And that all charter committee waivers must be submitted and approved, not just submitted, but submitted and approved by June 1st each year, which is why I'm going to be getting on a bunch of people here next week so we can try and get some of these wrapped up, because we do have some outstanding things going on with some residency waivers. And I'll add to that, and I know I mentioned this before, but if you know one of your all-star players is outside your boundary or doesn't go to a school inside your boundary, you better get a waiver started next week, because that needs to be put together, sent to the region, then it needs to be presented to the charter committee, and they only meet on Wednesdays. And I think there's only 2 Wednesdays left in June or in May. And so it takes a little time to get that done. So you need to get those in next week. Lisa, question.
There is a clarifying question in the chat that players are redshirted for that first year, even if there is no league in their boundary.
It would depend on
Or
what the
their
charter committee
district.
rules.
So this is from, well, I don't know what league Angie is from, but I'm wondering if she's from a new league.
Angie, what league are you from? I can try and give a specific answer. I'll just talk about some of the things we've got going on right now. Henry County, Newcastle Henry County Youth Baseball, which is the teenage league, Hagerstown and Ross Center are working on a combined league. Okay.
She is from the Henry County Youth Baseball.
Originally, we submitted a residency waiver like this to the region. And yes, even though Ross Center and Hagerstown are not having a junior senior league this year, they were only going to grant us a regular season only for those kids, those 4 kids that we submitted a waiver for. That is why they're asking us to do a combined league between Ross Center, Hagerstown, and Henry County, or Newcastle, Henry County, because if we do that, they will get tournament eligibility immediately. So that's why we're going that direction. And some of it doesn't make sense to me. If they're showing me a workaround, I don't know why they couldn't just grant full eligibility, but that's the direction I'm being pushed by Central Region. So hopefully that answers the question. Does anybody else have questions, or is there a follow-up to that question? Lisa, are we good?
Nothing further.
All right, I'm going to move on then. All right, so then there are district administrator authorized waivers, which weren't a thing until a couple of years ago when the region and the charter committee started getting overwhelmed. They have authorized district administrators to approve some waivers to relieve the regional directors of some of their work. Examples are president or player agent coaching in the tournament waiver, which here I have an example of one from last year for somebody, for Josh Estel. Like I said, I will grant these every time. Another one would be advance without play waivers. That's only though if the team is only skipping one level of tournament play. So if, for example, in the case of Newcastle Henry County this year, won't be playing a district tournament. They'll be advancing directly to the state tournament for their junior and senior baseball teams. I am permitted to create a advance without play waiver. If they were going directly to the regional and there wasn't a state tournament for them to be in, then that would need to be approved by the regional director. And I already have one of those, a blanket one of those, actually, for the junior league softball. If we ever get a league to decide that they're going to participate in the junior league softball tournament, I have a advance without play, a perpetual one for every year, so I don't have to ask for every year for us to have a host team in our regional tournament. All right, any questions about any waivers at all before we move forward to the last part of our training? All right. Well, there's one other group of things before we get to the last part, and I'll go through these quick because we're running short on time. The team roster information page. This is what I talked about earlier when we talked about, well, what if the kid has a nickname like Skip Mills instead of Julian Mills? You will put on here, and this is used by the district, and if you move on to a state tournament, they'll have a separate one that gets filled out, and I'll actually fill it out for you. This will show the team name and location. You need to put in the division, and then on here you put the player's jersey number, the name they want to be known by, because this is used by the PA announcer at the tournament site. Pronunciation, it's a big deal. Nobody likes to have parents screaming out in the crowd the correct pronunciation of a kid's name. So we want to make sure we try and get that correct. So you put in the pronunciation, do the best you can phonetically. If the PA announcer has questions, they'll probably still come to the manager and validate that they've got it right. This is also used as a contact form. So I want the manager and coach's names, manager's phone number, and email address so that I can contact them for any reason, such as rainouts. Same with the league president, although I've got all the league president's contact information, still please put that in there. And this is an editable PDF. You will be getting that in your handouts for this meeting. It's easy to edit and print. Please, if at all possible, do not handwrite these. Part of the reason for doing it is so that I don't need to look at handwriting that I can't understand. Okay? Typing it out makes it much clearer. One thing on here is it asks that to please put the roster in ordered by jersey number. If you don't have jerseys yet and you don't know what the kid's jersey number is going to be, not a big deal. Just put in the player name and pronunciation. And when we get the jersey numbers, we'll add them. Okay. All right. And one other item about this. This is the form for the international tournament. Use this for everything but the coaches pitch tournament. The coaches pitch tournament has a different form that has room for 4 coaches. Okay. So please don't use the coaches pitch tournament for the international tournament and vice versa. All right. Moving on. Medical release. You need to have a new medical release every year for every player. And we also recommend that managers and coaches have a medical release as well. Please include those in your affidavit book. Needs to be a new one every year. If I see one of these for 2022, I'm going to say we need a new medical release. Common mistakes using a medical release from a past year. The player address on the medical release does not match the home address on the affidavit. Now, that might be confusing if you're using a school address. I don't want the school address on the medical release. Please put the home address on the school. I need to change this, and I will clarify that before I send out the PDF to you of this presentation. Birth date doesn't match the affidavit. That raises questions on what's going on here. Or missing or typed signatures. This document, as all, does not accept electronic signatures. The form model release. This is something Little League had a standard form for in past years, but in recent years they wanted a custom one done for each league. We recommend it for all D6 players, managers, and coaches. The top section is done for minor players. All right. And the bottom section is signed. Well, all players sign the top section, fill in the top section. Bottom section is signed by the parents, but it's only necessary if the player is a minor, which in Little League, I don't think there's an opportunity to have a player that's not a minor. So player on top, parent on the bottom. This is pretty important document, even though it's actually not required. We do require it. Well, it says we recommend it, but I would like to have one of these for every single player if at all possible, because it gives us the authority and the parents sign off to use the player's name, image, and likeness on the website, to take pictures of them, and things like that. Sometimes if you've got a foster kid, they don't want to have their kid's picture taken. And this is the avenue for them letting us know they don't want their kid's name to be out on the website. They don't want their kid's picture to be out on the website and things like that. If you have that situation happen, please still have the parent fill out one of these forms and put on there, right in there, they do not give us permission to use the player's name, image, and likeness. Okay? There's a lot of confusion if we don't get one of these, and then we have to go and say, hey, is the parent not giving us because they don't authorize it, or because you just didn't get us one? So that's why I really want to get one of these from every player, because it clarifies how we are to proceed in this manner. All right. Any question about that before we move forward? All right, and then these two things we've already covered. You need to have the manager and coach eligibility items, the certificate of completion for Diamond Leader. It can be from this year or from a past year, as long as they got one. And if they have lost it, they can go back out onto the Little League training area and download it again. It's still out there waiting for them. In fact, I had to download mine to be able to put a picture of it on this training. And they have to have the USA Baseball stuff. All right, any questions before we finish up? All right, the last section is the preferred affidavit book order of assembly and the materials I want you to use to make your affidavit books not be a total mess. So the preferred materials are a hard binder and sheet protectors, okay? The affidavit book, and now we're getting, I'm going to go back to this prior page because I think I mentioned this, but I just want to make sure that I do. For the sheet protectors, they can be, these things can get kind of expensive if you're getting a lot of them. So I don't really care about having super heavy duty ones. You can, I leave it up to the league's discretion to get whatever thickness of sheet protectors they want. Some of them give me real nice ones, and some of them give me real cheap thin ones. The only thing about the real cheap thin ones is they rip really, really easily. So keep that in mind. But I'm not going to dictate that you get any specific way to those, but this is what I want you to give me, please. And that's how most of the districts do it. But we still always do get a manila folder with a bunch of loose papers in there that can be easily lost and are hard to verify, and it's just a mess. So this is what I want you guys to do. And I thank you guys for being so willing to do this in the past, because I know it does add a little bit of expense. So the front cover, we're going to go in order of how I want these to be assembled. Front cover is needs to show the league, the division, and the year the affidavit book's for. This is from my league's last year in Little League. These kids are playing on Yorktown High School's varsity baseball team now. And those of you coming from fourth sectional from Newcastle are going to see several of them that played in this tournament in the sectional next week. Yeah, here's where I talk about the sheet protectors and the quality. You can either choose to put all of a player's documents in one sheet protector, or you can have a separate sheet protector for different documents for the player. I'm not going to dictate to you how you do that, however you want to do it, but at the very least, don't put multiple players in the same sheet protector, okay? So I like you to have a pocket in the front cover, and that's where the affidavit goes, because I think I mentioned earlier in the training, this is a living document. We will take it out and update it every single game the team plays in. So it's a lot easier to just pull it out of this pocket than to pull it out of a sheet protector. If you don't have a pocket, put it in a sheet protector, because we don't want it to just be loose. But that should be the very first thing in the affidavit book. Next thing is the player roster from the player information sheet. After that come any waivers for the team, not for the player, but for the team. So if you've got an advance without play waiver, that's where this goes. All right. Then if you have a supplemental affidavit that we talked about, it will go next. Then the boundary map and the boundary map signature page. And I don't care if these look nice like they do in here, where they're one's on where you got it opened up and you got the map on one side and the signature page on the other. Just get them in the right order. That'll help me out a lot. This is an old style of map. I actually haven't taken out player names there, but anyway, we used to have to send the description of the boundary with the signatures, and you've actually got Yorktown's boundary here and a Brooklyn description. So I must not have the Yorktown description for this. So that's kind of nutty. But when you get your printout, you're going to get 2 pages. One's going to be the map, and one's going to be, it's going to start to have addresses on it, and then it'll continue to have addresses, and then you'll have the signature. So one side's the map, one side's the signature. So now we're going to talk about the order the player information should go. And it's helpful for me if you try and get it in the right order, but don't be upset when you get back your affidavit book and you find out that I've rearranged things to my liking. So the player information goes in this order on the map, or in their sheet, in their protector. And if you have multiple protectors, please try and get them in this order. Tournament player verification form, that's like the cover sheet for the player, so it needs to be first. All right, followed by residency waivers or residency documents, or the school form. Waivers with supporting documents will go next, and then the medical release and the model release. Okay. Managers and coaches should also have an area. They should have sheet protector with their information in it. Each manager or coach should go in a separate sheet protector, not all of them dumped in the same one. We want Diamond Leader certificate, abuse awareness certificate, medical release, and I don't think I mentioned this, but coaches and managers should have model release too. And then if there's any coach or manager waivers, like for example, we saw that one with Josh Estel, where he requested to be, he's the league president, he requested to be the manager. If there's one of those for that coach, then that waiver should go in their sheet protector. And then following that, there should be any additional non-standard forms like helmet decal letters, which we did not talk about in this training, but we will talk about in our pre-tournament meeting. We'll talk about helmet decal letters, because those are not permitted on decals are not permitted on Little League helmets without a letter from the manufacturer saying that they aren't going to degrade the structural stability of the helmet and void the warranty. So anything like that would come after all this other information. Items not to include in the affidavit book. After validation by the DA, the birth certificate should not be kept in the affidavit book. And also, please do not put items in the affidavit book that are not required. For example, regular season player registration forms, league insurance certificates. None of these are required. In fact, league insurance certificates are not valid for the tournament. With your tournament registration, every league gets every team is covered under a different insurance for that tournament, for the international tournament. Coaches pitch tournament's a different story, but in fact, I think we do need to require insurance certificates for that. But for the international tournament divisions, don't put put insurance certificates in there. Not needed, and they just clutter things up. All right, I think that's the end. So does anybody have any questions about any of this before we finish? All right, I'm going to stop the share, turn on my camera. And so that's everything. If you do find out you have questions after the fact, don't hesitate to contact me through text or through email, or you can call me. I will be sending out, after I correct to clarify that one part of the training, a PDF that has every slide from this. We also recorded it, and that'll take me a little bit of time to get out onto the YouTube channel because it has to be put in a specific format. But we'll get that out there as soon as we can. Should be within a day or two. And then every document we talked about in this training, I'm going to send you a blank copy of it. So I'm giving you one last chance to ask a question now before we dismiss. Lisa, is there anything in the chat?
No.
All right, everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this, for participating in this training. Before we started doing this training, we had tremendous headaches trying to verify and validate the affidavit books, and leagues would get things sent back to them very, very often for correction. It's been much improved since we've been doing this training. Hopefully the leagues that weren't here today are going to watch this video and go through the training, and it'll help them. But I thank you guys all so very, very much for being here today. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I'm going to sign off now. So thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks. Lisa, do I have to do anything special to stop the